Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go! July of 2002, when I was 16, our neighbor, who was a brat with a capital C, decided she wanted to have a satellite TV installed. The house she lived in had a very small yard in back, smaller in front, and the fence that my mother had installed a couple of years ago was only about 5 yards from her side door. The only place the satellite could be installed was on the back of the house, but there was no way the vehicles could make it to her backyard. So, in her infinite wisdom, the brat decided to have them tear down our fence and drive over our property to get to her backyard. This starts a huge fight between her and my mother. The brat tries to claim that mom built a fence too close to her house anyway, and mom produced a land description to prove the fence was in the right spot. Turns out they were both wrong. We knew the woman had built her house too close to the property line, but it seems it was closer than we thought. She was only feet from the line. That fence should have been almost touching the side of her house. Her uncle was a deputy mayor of our small 2,000 population town, and she tried to get him involved. Nothing came of it, so we thought it was over. Late September, early October that same year, while I was in school, mom was taking a shower when our 2 dogs alerted her to someone at our door. She put on a bathrobe and went to see the police chief and about a dozen officers on our lawn, claiming they had been tipped off to a meth lab on the property and demanded to be allowed to search. Mom realized that the brat had to have been the one to call them, as the chief of police was known to be a personal friend to her family. Mom demanded a search warrant and they didn't have one, which triggered several hours of them refusing to leave until they searched the property. This all started around 9 or 10 in the morning, nearing 3 p.m. Mom tells them she needs to pick me up from school and take me to her mother's house because I couldn't drive yet. They refuse to move their vehicles to let her leave and say it's fine. They will send a squad car to pick me up, which would have just humiliated me. Mom calls her lawyer, who informs her that if they didn't produce a warrant, tell them to leave. So the chief tells her if he goes for a warrant, he will tell whoever issues him that he can smell mess on a property and will be given a warrant for anything he asks for. He will then return, kick our door out of the frame, and if our dogs even look at him for that, he will shoot both of them in the head and kill them both. Yes, he actually said that to my mother. Mom called Grandma to pick me up from school and let the police search the house. They found my mom's gun safe. This safe was one of those made of steel with a circular lock, kind of like on a soda machine, and had the key sitting on top of it. Before anyone says how unsafe it was just my mom and stepdad in the house most of the time. I was an only child and lived with my grandparents and only visited on weekends. And mom kept the door to her room locked with a key. There was no way anyone under 18 was getting near her guns. The cops proceed to take a crowbar and pry the safe open, even though the key is right there, and it's clearly the key to the safe. They then take the guns outside and divide them up. They even took my mom's handgun, which she had a concealed carry permit for. This continued for hours until mom relented and opened my stepdad's shop building. He was using it to house his motorcycle while he slowly restored it from a wreck about 15 years before. They barely got over the threshold of the door before screaming, "Meth lab," and pointed at the cleaning agents and bottles that were all scooted together. Nothing else. No other signs of mess other than some cleaning agents and empty mason jars sitting near one another. They brought out heavy spot lamps and more cops. By 1 in the morning, my mother had been sitting outside in the cool, fall weather in nothing but a bathrobe this entire time. They claimed to have found a marijuana plant behind our 6-foot-tall privacy fence that kept people from seeing us in our hot tub. When I found out about this, I was upset. I was 16 and went to school in a small town. Everyone would know about it. The next day, Saturday, I was piddling around on the internet when a friend messaged me to ask what had happened and why was my mother in jail. My mother was not in jail. Friend tells me, "My mom said it's on the news right now. Your mom and stepdad are sitting in jail this weekend without bond for running the largest drug den in your town's history." When mom called the news to ask them why they had run that story without checking, they apologized and said they had been contacted by the town police and were told to run the story. The next night they issued a public apology for it. I refused to go to school that Monday. It's very important to note that I have not been in school since Friday. On Tuesday, when my grandpa dropped me off, the drug-sniffing dog was at the school. However, as it was close to drug-free week, I thought nothing of it. My business teacher told me she'd seen the article in the local paper, but that it looked like it had been staged, and if I caught any crap for it, to let her know. I went to my locker as the officer walked out of the same hallway, but since that was a hall the principal's office was on, I didn't think anything of it. I noticed the locker standing completely open, and when I got to it, I realized it was my locker. I blew up on the principal. I understand now that it's not my property and the school can authorize it being searched, but it was just nonsense. Why was I being searched? The principal says, "No, you weren't searched. You must have left your locker open last night." I say, friend 1 and friend 2 have their lockers next to mine, and they have basketball practice until 4. They shut my locker if I leave it open. I haven't been here since Friday. Are you telling me that everyone in this school left a locker standing open for all of Monday? I called my mom and was pulled out of school for Tuesday as well. Ultimately, all the charges were thrown out because of that marijuana plant. The chief of police put in his official report that it had been 8 feet tall, and when questioned about it, when they tried to press drug charges on mom, he clearly said, "Yes, Your Honor, it was 8 feet tall." The judge asked him when he found it, and he said about 1 in the morning. The judge then said that there really had been a marijuana plant that was 8 feet tall behind a 6-foot tall fence. He would not have needed to demand permission to search the property. The charges were thrown out. And that's where it stood for 10 years. Mom waited and played the long game because she wanted to make fully sure the statute of limitations ran out. She didn't want to give them any legal reasons to retaliate against her. She waited and waited. Then at the first town council meeting after the statute ran out, she made contact with one of the council members. In a small town, you don't screw with the council members. Everyone knows them, and everyone listens to them. Or they do here at least. This was the head of the council too, and at the time his grandson was my co-worker. So he knew of me and he liked me well enough since I worked for the largest business in our area. He listened to Mom's story and told her that the last he'd heard, there was nothing in the evidence locker at the station at the moment. Meaning none of the guns they had confiscated had been entered. When she told him most of them belonged to me and were basically family heirlooms, they were, he nodded and asked her that if he could produce those guns, could she prove they belonged to her? Mom said she had a notebook of descriptions of the guns. Their serial numbers on hunting rifles that had scopes, and that 2 of them had distinguishing marks that were hidden from sight, but she could find them and show them off. Because my mom loves having a paper trail on everything. He told her she would give them back that Monday. We found out that he went to the station and told the same police chief that because they had never successfully charged us with any crime, and that now the statute of limitations had run out, all the confiscated property had to be turned back over to us. But there was a rumor that the guns weren't in evidence. He would be in on Monday to have it checked. The police chief went pale, and on Monday, they were all in the evidence locker. However, one of them was missing a scope. It came out somehow that the chief of police had never intended to enter them into evidence and had sold them to his friends. He'd been thinking he got away with it for a decade until Mom turned back up with proof that they belonged to her and legally had to now be returned. He had to go and buy back every one of them, sometimes paying more than twice what he'd been paid because some of these friends had not been speaking to him for some time, and one of them had taken the scope off a while back. He was immediately fired and arrested for it. We got our guns back. My parents were renovating their house about a year ago and they needed an electrician to move some lighting fixtures. Generally, I have a friend that's my go-to electrician for stuff like this. But my parents had hired a guy to paint the living room and needed this done quickly. My electrician friend happened to be on vacation, so he wouldn't be able to get out to me until after the painter was already scheduled to come. After referring with a couple of other friends, they recommended an electrician. We are all from the same country and happened to immigrate to the same small town, so people within our culture generally recommend other people from that same country. the electrician comes by for a quote. I never met this individual, and he tells my parents that it's all based on the amount of time it would take and that he can't give them an exact quote because he doesn't know how much time it's going to take until the job is already started. My parents think this sounds reasonable and end up hiring him. Just as an aside, I installed Nest cameras for my parents in their living room facing their front door. So we had a good view of the area where the job was being performed. This job takes him about an hour, and he literally sat on my couch on his phone for about 5 hours, watching TV, kicking his feet up, waiting for my mom to get home so that he could show her the work is complete, and charge her like 6 hours for a job that took him about an hour, which I confirmed how unprofessional his behavior was on my Nest cam. My parents didn't want to cause any friction, so they paid him for the amount of time he charged them. I believe it was like $500 for something that should have really cost like $150 or so. Anyway, the lighting fixtures were installed, he received his check and went in his merry way. My electrician friend later confirmed that this guy had seriously upcharged my parents. A few months later, I decided to take a side gig selling solar as a 1099 employee. I was making decent money at my existing job, but I had a wide enough network where I could help people around me with generally good solar deals and make some good money for myself on a side. The company I connected with would give me my price on panels, including installation as well as on a roof if a roofing job was required. My price was extremely good, and the way I made my money was by tacking on my fee at the end, built into the roof price and the per watt price of the panels plus installation. Much like my parents found the electrician, this same electrician, who I had never met, found me, inquiring about a roofing job. I told him that I don't do standalone roofs, but that I could package something for him, including solar, which would get rid of most of his electricity bill. He said he didn't have the money up front for the roof or the panels, which is fine because we can finance, and it started to sound like he was a little bit desperate as his roof was leaking and he didn't have the capital to fix it. Generally, when I go to a client, I try to keep the price down and make it more desirable for the client. I would rather make less money than no money, so I generally make around $3,000 to $5,000 per install, which is a win-win. When I got the call, I thought the guy's name was familiar, and sure enough, it was the electrician who had helped my parents and left a bad taste in my mouth. At this point, I knew he was desperate for a resolution to his roof issue, and I knew he barely spoke any English, so my word was going to be gold. I set up an appointment to go meet up with him in about a week. I knew that I was going to upcharge him due to the language barrier he would have with other installers, his desperation, and the fact that he upcharged my parents. I got the price quote from the installer that said the roof would cost about $10,000 for a strip and rear roof. This was a really good house, as the house was a multi-family unit, and I was expecting the quote to come around $15,000. They also gave me the price on the solar panels, which would be around $15,000. So the price I was looking at for the project was $25,000. Generally, in a good situation like this, I might have called in $29,000 total. Got him a spectacular deal, made a couple grand, and called it a day. But I was thinking, screw this guy. So I adjusted the cost of the roof to $19,000 and the price of the panels to $21,000. Half expecting that I would eventually need to come down on the pricing at some point. I went over there to meet up with him, proposed this setup, told him how good the quality of the roofing job would be, which is accurate, and that the solar system would virtually wipe out his electricity bill and that I would get him set up with a 25-year loan to keep his monthly payment down. He agreed to this, was excited to get his roof done and really didn't care much about the panels. But they were part of the bundle, and on we went. Once everything was installed, I was paid out on my deal. I went to cash my $15,000 check. I went to my parents' house and gave them $1,500 each and explained to them what had happened and how I stumbled upon a $15,000 commission check. Just so it's clear, there is nothing shady about what I did. It was way more expensive than it needed to be, and everything was disclosed to him properly. He just paid more than he would have had to, even if he simply shopped around, but at the end of the day, it's well within my rights to charge whatever I want, like it's within the rights of the customer to tell me to get lost. A A big chunk of what he paid is covered by incentives, but he still paid way more than typical. Moral of the story, especially for contractors, plumbers, electricians, mechanics, don't screw people because you're more aware of how things work and they are in a particular field, because you might end up getting screwed later tenfold. Edit. I am getting kinda bothered by people essentially calling me a POS. I don't believe I did anything wrong here. He pretended to work longer than he actually did, and I have had no contact with this person. My parents didn't want to be confrontational, so they paid him. In a separate event, he reached out to me for a service I provide. I have freedom to set my own pricing on his service, and I provided him with a quote for said service. The service was provided in great working condition and is warranted for 25 years against anything that may occur. He wasn't forced to agree to this. He wasn't coerced or threatened. He simply agreed because he saw the value in it. I know that I overcharged them, and plenty of solar salespeople overcharge if customers are willing to pay because a big chunk of the money is provided through government incentives. He still has a brand new roof with architectural shingles, and he has a brand new solar system. I, 20 male, am German. I went to a well-known electronics store in Germany looking for some Nintendo accessories for my Switch. As I strolled through the aisles, an old lady approached me, asking where to find Steam cards. Since I knew, I just told her they were by the register. The nice grandma was kind to me and told me she asked because I was young and there was no employees nearby. So I helped her. I went to look for my stuff again. I was wearing a red t-shirt and some really tight black pants. The shirt had Japanese signs on it as well, and I can't wrap my mind around how the next person thought I worked there. Now the story begins. As I picked up a nice case for my Nintendo Switch, I heard a signature ahem. There wasn't a single person around before, so I immediately looked up, and there she was. A real nice Karen. Mid-50s, short red hair, secretary glasses. I've never seen anyone's face scream "suck her mom" more. Excuse me, where can I find… She reads from a note. BenQ Zowie RL2755 gaming monitor. I actually know that. I just got one for myself 3 hours ago. I understand why you had trouble finding the monitor since they aren't in the monitor aisle. They have a discount at the moment. I know that. That's why I'm here. Here you go. Pointing towards the monitor after walking her to the right aisle. I have back problems. I'll need you to carry that to the checkout in my car. No please or thank you, by the way. Me not realizing she thinks I'm an employee, I say, I can help you when I finish my shopping, but I think you can ask an employee to do that for you. Huh? And you are sure that you're not just being lazy? Pardon? If it's not your department, I understand, but acting like you don't work here is disgusting and lazy. Well, I really don't work here, I just helped you because you asked, and I knew where the monitor you wanted was. I saw you help that lady before. I know you work here. I want to speak to your manager now. She was actually going from fake smiling to screaming in a second, and I was terrified of this woman. I told you already, I don't work here. Look at my shirt. You think that says the name of the store in Japanese? How can you even come to that conclusion? You're not getting out of this. Help! Help! She literally, and I kid you not, started screaming for help. You're insane. I started walking off, and at this point I was terrified of this psycho. She had a real wild and insane look in her eyes. I don't know why I just started walking, but I was so baffled I didn't know how to deal with that much insanity. Of course, Karen isn't just going to let me walk. The psycho decides to grab me with one arm around my neck and her other hand grabbing my throat. Now I start smelling the Prosecco. Just out of reaction and panic, I forcefully fought my way free of the claws of the Karen, and I accidentally elbowed her in the face. She screamed bloody murder. I'm a really sensitive guy and I just couldn't help it. I started crying. I didn't know how to handle what happened at all. The crazy Karen was bleeding and screaming and I was crying. By now, employees had arrived, and customers too. Your colleague just punched my nose in. Me, still ugly, crying. I don't work here. She just grabbed me and I panic. I'm so sorry. At this point, I tried to see if Karen was okay. I wanted to help her up and apologize. I'm a huge guy, 191 centimeters tall, muscular, and I easily weigh 110 kilograms. So I felt like I could have reacted better to her assaulting me other than trying to break free with full force. As I apologized while still weeping, the psycho scratched my face, hitting my lip which started to bleed like crazy. Me and Karen were bleeding at this point. I couldn't stop crying because my body just didn't know how to deal with that stress. Now we were sitting in separate rooms in that store, waiting for the police to arrive. The police picked up my story and gave me real dirty looks and made some comments. I felt like the ground under my feet was slipping away. I still couldn't stop weeping or the bleeding from my face. After about 45 minutes of being scared out of my mind, the policeman came back with Karen behind them in handcuffs. They told me that they had reviewed the camera footage and that my story checked out 100%. They were taking her in anyway for actually throwing her phone at one of the employees of the store's face while waiting in that room. I am so sorry, I don't know the context to that. So they asked me if I would like to press charges too, and I of course said yes. So an awful story was a kind of happy ending. One of the worst days of my life for sure. I'm a real snowflake. That was too much to handle for me. The case is still ongoing. I can keep you updated if you would like. Her hearing is in a couple of weeks, as this story happened shortly after the release of Smash Bros. For the Switch. German court is slow as heck. All I know is that she spent a whole night in custody, which makes me extremely happy to hear. This happened to my neighbor slash best friend slash boss, BFF, and me today. A little background important to the story. We're both red-headed women, both work for the same law enforcement department. I generally work nights, she generally works days, and we both were told to take the day off after working 3 36-hour shifts with only a few hours of sleep between because of dealing with panic from a certain virus that, aside from a couple of travelers, hasn't hit our area yet. Since we both needed stuff, BFF and I grabbed BFF's 2 offspring and head for a certain store that is a local chain that is something like a slimmed-down W-Mart. The uniform of their employees is black slacks, white polo, and an apron that varies by department. BFF is dressed in flats, casual pants, and a white button down over a cami and her vest. I'm in blue jeans, knee-high, boots, and a department t-shirt over my vest. In other words, nothing like store's uniform. Plus we have, belts with handcuffs, guns, and holsters. We're in a store for about half an hour. I am pushing one cart, Offspring 1 is pushing the other, while BFF is holding Offspring 2 in one arm and pulling things off the shelf with the other. Suddenly we hear a loud crash and a scream in the next aisle. BFF passes her Offspring 2 off to me, telling me to watch her, and heads over to the next aisle. She barely makes it around the corner when I hear her call for me. I sit Offspring 2 down, tell her to wait with Offspring 1, and come around the corner. Here is a sight I see. One young woman, her head slightly bleeding, trying to free herself from the grasp of a crazy blonde lady, probably roughly in her late 30s to late 40s, while a man and a few kids look on. The crazy lady looks up at my BFF and immediately says, "Oh good, are you the manager of this crabby store? This crazy witch refuses to help me. I want her fired." She then jerks the young woman so hard that the young woman runs into the shelves, cutting herself a second time. "Ma'am, let her go," my BFF states flatly. "I don't think she works here." "What do you mean you don't think she works here? Don't you know your own employees? What kind of crabby manager are you?" BFF looks at me, I look at her, then look back at the crazy lady, giving her my most wicked smile. "I'd say she knows her employees pretty well," I remarked. "However, that lady doesn't work for this store. She is not wearing the uniform." "Tell your security grunt to be silent." The crazy lady spouts off. Mama," one of the kids urgently starts. "I don't think she's a security." "Shut up, Marco." Not the real name. "Can't you see Mama's talking to the manager?" "Ma'am, I am not the manager," BFF says, pointing to the store manager, who is now hurrying over. "He is. Now let go of that girl. I won't ask again." She starts reaching for her handcuffs. "Freaking lying C-word. You white folks witches are all the same. Racist and sticking up for each other. Rather ironic, considering that the crazy lady was paler than I am. And that's saying something." At that moment, Offspring 2 came running around the corner. "Hey, is it okay if I…" The crazy lady finally let go of the terrified and injured girl and then grabbed the Offspring 2, flinging her halfway down the aisle. "Stupid brat! Wait your turn, you little stupid. Wham! Crazy lady stopped talking as she ricocheted off the shelves. Don't ever touch my daughter again. BFF told her as she tried to yank out the crazy lady. At this point, the man that had been standing with the kids tries to grab onto my BFF and winds up taking a knee to his groin for his trouble. The crazy lady takes advantage of the moment, pushes BFF off, grabs a jar off the shelf to swing towards my BFF's head, and freezes as she realizes I've drawn my weapon. Her eyes go wide. I'll call corporates and have you fired for this, she hissed. I guess the crazy lady didn't see anything wrong with having a weapon herself and trying to use it. But somehow, someone else with a weapon stopping her from potentially killing someone else is a bad thing. Mama, the little boy screamed. I've been trying to tell you, they don't work here. That lady is police. Look at her shirt. She looked down at my shirt and she definitely got that look people get when they realize they are in serious trouble. Wish I could say the fight left her then. Instead, as she was mirandized, she kept insisting that she had done nothing wrong and that she was being entrapped by the police. After the crazy lady and the man that tried to grab BFF were cuffed, given their rights, and sat on the floor, the manager helped me watch over the two while BFF went and checked on Offspring 2 while we waited on someone actually on duty and for medics to arrive. The entire thing took maybe 5 minutes from the time we heard a crash until the end. Another 10 for co-workers and medics to arrive. The young woman that was first assaulted had to go to the hospital to be checked out. Poor girl was really scared she was going to catch something at the hospital. Offspring 2 had her arm broken and also had to go to the hospital. The man and kids turned out to be her boyfriend and their children. The crazy lady and boyfriend are now in jail for the foreseeable future since courts are closed. Crazy lady's kids are going to social services. The boyfriend was still in the process of applying for his green card. Now he probably can't get it and may be facing deportation at the end of all of this. Since the injured girl, BFF, and I couldn't finish our shopping, the manager took our lists and promised that everything will be delivered to our houses tomorrow. Before anyone asks, we are not required to wear our vests off duty, but most of us do. As for why we have our guns and badges while shopping with kids, in our department certain ranks are required to carry weapons, badges, and cuffs while off duty. Oh, and this whole thing apparently started because the store was out of toilet paper and the crazy lady decided the girl stocking up on pickles must be an employee. I used to have a veteran's disability pension for a hearing defect. It's now merged with a state pension. It was small and back home was paid annually. However, I moved to the UK and this pension was still paid by my government, but now administered by the UK DWP, Department of Work and Pensions, who paid it fortnightly. Some years ago, I was entitled to a disability allowance because of various issues. At the time, I was diagnosed with diabetes but was trying to control it with diet. So I got called in to the local job center for an interview. Unfortunately, I had a Karen for an interviewer. I'm on a spectrum, but I am high functioning. This means that I don't suffer fools gladly and I can be very rules-bound. Firstly, she questions why I hadn't declared the VDP as part of my earnings. I had, but it was in another part of the form. Then she said that I couldn't have diabetes because I wasn't taking any medicine, and as I was still in poor case, she would not allow my claim. Now the disability allowance claim had nothing to do with my diabetes. However, she was stupid to put in her letter of rejection that I hadn't diabetes because I wasn't taking any medicine for it. She also said that they would no longer pay my VDP. I sent a copy of the letter to my high commission who said don't worry, they would deal with it. I handed a copy of the letter to my doctor who was incensed. She complained to the DWP asking about Karen's medical qualifications. So I got asked to have another interview at about 1 p.m. on a certain day with the same Karen. I said that I couldn't guarantee to attend on that day as I had another appointment that morning. The message back from the Karen was if I didn't attend, my claim would be refused. To go in with the flow, I said that I would try to attend, but I might be a little late. So I have my morning appointment, go home, change, and toddle off to the job center. I got there at the dot of 1 p.m. only to find that the Karen had booked an interview room on the first floor instead of the ground floor. There is no left, by the way. To cut a long story short, it took me nearly 15 minutes to haul my sorry self up those stairs, in the end being helped by this guy in a suit who asked why I was trying to get to the first floor, and I told him that I had an interview and that the Karen who was seeing me chose a room. So I get to the room and Karen says, "You're late. I'm refusing your claim unless you have a very good reason." So I said to her, "Well, my day has been interesting. You were warned that I had an appointment this morning, and because of it, I might be late. I want you to tell me about this appointment and exactly what happened to make you late." I turned up at the appointment this morning, took my clothes off, and then had two nice young ladies slather my meat into Vig with lube. They then proceeded to do things to set meat into Vig. They then got me to lie down on my side facing the wall, and one of them proceeded to stick her fingers up my A. "How dare you talk such filth in front of me? Your case is closed." The suit, who was listening out of sight, "Excuse me, Karen, but you did ask him to tell you about his appointment and exactly what happened to make him late." Then the suit asks me, "How did your prostate examination go?" More tests, unfortunately." "And was that the reason you were late?" "No, the stupid witch was being vindictive and interviewed me on his floor instead of the ground floor. She knew my claim was because I had breathing problems and couldn't climb stairs. I think she would have claimed that as I made it to the first floor, I was lying and refused the claim." He tells me, "I think you're right." Then the suit turns to Karen and says, "You will approve this DLA claim as I had to help him up the stairs, and based on my observations, he qualifies. And you and your manager will report to me tomorrow at 9 a.m. in my office to explain your actions. If you're late, you will be terminated." Karen, with a very white face, "Yes, sir." Turns out he was an area director that the DWP had sent in to investigate the high level of complaints about that job center. It also turns out that a complaint from a high commissioner about breaching an international agreement is a big deal for the DWP. Who knew? This story is not high stakes, but it amused me at the time. I used to work on an ambulance. My partner and I had been called to pick up an older guy with severe dementia. He was non-responsive at baseline because his labs were low or something. Since he was a vet, he needed to go to the Veterans Hospital. No big deal. We go get him and head off towards the hospital. This was definitely not an emergency, but I was doing my due diligence. Is he alert? Nope. Are his vitals normal? Not really, but he's old, and this is his normal according to the paperwork. Any new issues? None. And then the kicker. Is he having a stroke? Spoiler alert, no. To check this, we use a fast acronym. Face, is his face drooping on one side? Arms, is he noticeably weaker on one side? Speech, is his speech slurred? Time. If these answers are yes, then get to the hospital ASAP. This dude had zero symptoms of a stroke. He also couldn't understand what I was saying to him due to the dementia. At worst, one hand twitched when I asked him to squeeze, but it was a random muscle twitch. So I called the hospital and gave my report to the triage nurse. When I mentioned the twitch, she suddenly cuts me off and tells me I have to divert to the nearest hospital. Then she hangs up on me. I check my GPS and they are the nearest hospital. Your wish is my command, nurse lady. When we pull in, the ER staff was a little confused. We took the patient into a room, and as the doctors and nurses ran around looking like fools, a different nurse came in and asked what was going on. I explained it was a simple non-emergency visit because the patient's lab results were low. I heard a snide voice in the background saying, "That's the stroke patient on diverted." I clarified to the nurse that the patient was definitely not having a stroke. I explained my reasoning. I showed her the paperwork that proved this was his baseline, and she even redid the fast test to confirm. She agreed with me completely, giving a look towards the safe that was suddenly and mysteriously empty. The patient was able to get the appropriate care at the appropriate facility, and hopefully the nurse will be more likely to listen longer in the future. My auntie is a great woman, a little crazy but great. About 15 years ago, my cousin got her first job in a warehouse. She loved it. My cousin Danny isn't like the rest of the family. We're gobshites, but she is really quiet and sensitive. She was fine at her job for 2 weeks, and then a woman who was at least 20 years older than her started bullying her. She started giving Danny a huge chunk of her workload and telling her to get it done because bosses say so, and crap talking to her. Danny came home every day crying because she made her life hell, but still stuck it out because we're fighters. My auntie hates this, but she did love getting her own back. The next week, Danny goes to work and has to meet the next workers in orientation. My auntie stood at the front of them smiling at her and waving. She'd applied for a job at the same place to look after her until the woman left. Her plan started the next day. After having worked in warehouses before, she got the hang of it and was very efficient. She also made a point to get her work finished quickly so she could take on others' work, mainly the witches. After doing this for a week and talking to the managers in the smoking area about the work, my auntie says that the witch has just been standing around with no work and that others have noticed too and aren't happy. The managers must have kept an eye on her as she was in a meeting a few days later. This pissed her off and she was venting to a lot of people. My auntie used this as an opportunity to go to the manager and say that witch had been abusive and threatening about the warning to her. The witch was called into another meeting and fired the week before her holiday months-long cruise. One of the managers my auntie befriended and has been a very close family friend since. She's known as Auntie Debbie in my family now. She still knows the witch and said that she was horrible to work with, and she had many warnings for hostile work environment type things. The witch is now divorced and better, and keeps asking Auntie Debbie to make her birthday cakes for family members for £5. Idiot. So in my job, we need to track explicitly our effort and the time that we spent on which tasks. Each day must have at least 8 hours of recorded effort. And if there isn't enough work or for some other reason you aren't working productively the whole day, you'll have a hard time to think about where to put your efforts. If you record less than 8 hours, your bonus for the quarter will be less. What a stupid rule, I know. If you don't have enough work, that's also your problem. Lately, I took sick leave for some days as I was really not well, but after a few days, and as I had a bad feeling about letting the team down, I continued to work, even though I was sure that I could easily get another medical certificate to extend my paid sick leave. However, I was only able to work some of the hours and needed to rest/sleep the other half of the day. I was working from home. Remember the rule about time tracking? Well, I didn't know where to put the remaining hours and actually didn't bother to invent something. The next day my boss commented to me why my time tracking is not filled correctly. On the other hand, if you just report sick, you don't need to worry about the time tracking as a whole day will not count. So I just decided to go to the doctor the next day and extend my sick leave for a few more days, without worrying now about where to put my hours. The company apparently prefers people to not work at all, instead of only working half days without correct time tracking. I don't know how that makes sense from a business perspective, but it's not my business. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching and see you next time.